Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I wanted to comment on a comment I received in a recent video I published about Christian nationalism. I also, total side note, really appreciate the use of Clippy as the avatar. But this post talks about living in a divided household, and this is in reference to comments I made in my video about how I don't think it's possible for households, married couples, relationships to really exist in with opposing ideological viewpoints. I think in the past, politics was very different, and I'm talking about like the recent past, right? Like, people disagreed on tax policies, people, disagreed on proposals and ideas. It wasn't really as ideologically divided as it is now, but if you've followed any sort of social commentary about the state of like the dating market and just relations between the genders in the United States, it's very clear we're at an impasse, and just people aren't willing or able to meet halfway with people who are of different ideological, political beliefs. And so this is, I think, creating a big problem in relationships and households. Like, I don't see how a Republican and a Democrat can have a unified, harmonious household when the values underpinning the ideologies of both parties are just so divisive, and they're so at odds with one another. I've said this in other videos and in commentary I've written, like, you have to subordinate one set of values to the other. So, for example, I don't think men can also be Democrats, because in order for you to be a Democrat and accept all of the tenets of the ideology, the political ideology underpinning the Democratic Party, you have to surrender your manhood. So that party for decades now has told men to shut up, sit back, don't do anything. You're the problem. You're the enemy. You're the reason why women are suffering, all this stuff, right? It's just basically saying, men, you're the oppressors. We don't want you. But now the Democrats are also saying, but wait, we need your votes, right? So you can't be a strong man, a traditional man, have good values, like provide and protect for your family, but also surrender your manhood and say, well, okay, I'm also the enemy, right? Like, you can't be a leader and be an enemy at the same time. One has to give to the other. So that's why I think a lot of men, for example, are leaving the Democratic Party, because I think they see that, and you can't be a man in the sense of the word, and also be part of a political party that fundamentally hates you. And so I think that comes to play with relationships as well. There has to be some give. You can't have it like two opposing forces on equal footing. And so I think that is creating a lot of tension within relationships, or people just looking for a relationship. So the comment I wanted to focus on is, this person says, I live in a household like you were describing, though we are not yet married. I have found that a lot of the issues that come up are related more to names than to concepts. Though as our relationship has progressed, she has been slowly opening up to Republican values. She is still quite locked into the feminist liberal worldview, but I'm hopeful as she is exposed more to what I believe in, there will be larger and larger shifts. It has been a difficult road up until this point, and I can't imagine it will get any easier. She has been strongly indoctrinated by her time in college, especially since she was in an RA. Do you have any thoughts on what your transition was like, or any topics that helped you into your worldview? And so that's what I want to dive into today. And I am going to use a bit of a timeline to explain this, because while I don't think my personal evolution out of liberalness into more like centrist, conservative, traditional values, I don't think that it was linear per se. I think there were certain key moments and things that happened over a period of time that helped me kind of change my worldview. So to start, I want to talk first about church. So I think an important thing for me and how I evolved and got out of liberalism is that I had a strong foundation to begin with. And I know not a lot of people have this. So I was raised in an evangelical Baptist church. I was given a strong moral code right from the get-go. Both my parents are still married, while my father did not attend church, and that created a whole host of issues, which I could create a separate video on that. I had a good upbringing, two parents, loving relationship, married to this day. Was raised in the church, that was my social network, but also it provided my moral code. So I didn't do a lot of things or a lot of the rebellious things that normal teenagers did. Like I remember my first day in college, I got invited to a party and it was the weirdest thing for me because I had never, drank alcohol up until that point. And so, I didn't have, I think, the high school experience that a lot of teenagers had. And I'm grateful for that. But I think this is important for me to highlight because by having a church background, this gave me a reference point to circle back to later on in life. So I had a reference, I had a foundation. I wasn't just, leaving liberalness. I was going back to something I already knew. But what's important about this is that I started rejecting church in high school. So the original commenter talked about how the person in his life had become indoctrinated in college. I think it happens before college. And for me, part of my move towards feminism, I don't know that it was indoctrination per se. I think it was more of a rejection of what I was being told in church. So on the one hand, yes, I think church was a good thing. On the other hand, when I was a teenager, I hated it because purity culture was really pushed down my throat, and I was made to feel shameful for existing. And I was worthless, and that created a whole, host of psychological problems for me as well. But I understand now why I was taught those things. I wish the church leaders had respected my intellect and just kind of told me things as they were. So if you're involved in church, you're a youth pastor, the kids are smarter than you think, entrust them with information. I wish I had been kind of guided rather than told what to believe. And so I started rejecting this. And then obviously once I was in college, it was a lot easier to kind of get rid of church culture altogether. So I went from, attending church throughout high school, attending a church ministry at college. I was part of Baptist campus ministry and then Campus Crusade for Christ for the first 2 years, and then slowly petered out from there. But what replaced church was career. And this is where I think feminism really took hold for me. So instead of having a moral lifestyle kind of order to my life, career became the focal point of my life. It was everything I did, the only thing I focused on. And so I became very self-centered, but also because of the relationship between modern feminism and career, the two became intertwined for me. So it was very easy for me to kind of forgo all of the church teachings, continue to blame it, because a lot of my angst against the church was everything that feminism promised to solve. So feminism became the solution for me, and provided an alternative to religion that I didn't know at the time was actually becoming that alternative. So I think a good probably starting point is 2016, 2017. So yes, I voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. Vividly remember that night when she lost. And then in January, I skipped work, played hooky, and I went to Trump's inauguration, but I was protesting. And then the following day, I was at the inaugural Women's March. And then from then on forward, I was very involved in feminist organizations and feminist activities in DC. So that became a core part of my social network, honestly. I was in a Lean In circle, so that is part of the program created by Sheryl Sandberg, who was chief operating officer at Facebook. And this idea that, women should create professional networks and lean in because apparently we weren't, getting paid enough on all this kind of stuff. And so it was supposed to be like a professional support network. I also joined The Wing, which was at the time the first women's only co-working social club. And they opened in New York, but they were also in DC, in Hollywood, London. So they had a rapidly growing presence. And so I was involved in all of those things. And then 2020 happened. I at that time had conveniently or fate, either or, depending on how you want to look at it. But I moved. So in 2020 I left DC. My career came to an end, and I had done some mental health work prior to this point, where I was working with a life coach who made me see for the first time that living in DC was a choice. I had up until that point not really seen it as a choice. I saw it as a not even a requirement, but like an inevitability because of what I studied political science in college, and I just always saw myself living in DC. Like I didn't see anywhere else for my life to be, and I didn't see any other career for me other than the career I wanted, which was to be a spy for the CIA. And so I had a very difficult time when that career didn't come to fruition, and just things started to unravel in my life. This whole career that I had replaced my I think spiritual being with just didn't pan out. So I was feeling very empty and hollow. And so I had been working with someone in 2019. The contract I was on came to an end, so there was an opportunity for me to leave. So in January 2020, I moved out of the district. I moved back home to upstate New York, living with my parents temporarily, was going to move to an apartment in a neighboring town. And then obviously COVID hit, and I put the brakes on everything. No one really knew what was going on or what to do. I had started a whole new like contract-based job at that time. And that even like had, been completely upturned. So COVID was, I think, the starting point for me, and I think for a lot of people too, where I but I had an opportunity to start critically thinking about things in a way I didn't have the opportunity before, because I was just in a different context. My life was already in flux. And so I think I was more receptive to hearing different things, because COVID wasn't as much of a shock for me as I think it was for a lot of people, especially people who like lost jobs suddenly and just had nothing to do and didn't know what they were doing. I was already in the midst of my own career disruption, so it was a lot easier for me to navigate. So one thing I did during COVID, which is probably a bit unique, is I decided to travel the country. I had always had a dream to do a cross-country road trip. I was very much transfixed by the tiny house movement and the van life movement, and I desperately wanted to convert, a minibus into a tiny home, and I just didn't have the money for it, didn't have the expertise, and didn't know how to do it. So I settled on the next best option, which was converting my 2014 Subaru Outback into a stealth camper, and I lived out of that for about a year, and I traveled the country, literally circled around the whole thing, and that was a great opportunity. There's a lot of personal growth during that time, but I think the benefit for me was I got to see how COVID was playing out in different towns and different geographies and different states in real time. And the thing that really struck me the most is that we were in the midst of a nationwide global health crisis, a pandemic. Yet the policies varied from city to city, state to state, town to town. Everything varied. And so if you're in a public health crisis, you should expect homogeneity and continuity between how things go. And everything from, masks to what facilities were open, just things varied from place to place. So, in early 2020, 21, I was in Texas, and I proceeded westward, and I got to New Mexico, and I didn't know anything about New Mexico, but New Mexico is a democratically run state. I think it still is to this day. But I got to New Mexico, and I remember I went to Roswell because I wanted to see the alien stuff. And Roswell had a Planet Fitness. So I had a Planet Fitness membership. You pay like $25 a month, and you can access any Planet Fitness in the country. So I would go there to work out, but also shower, right? So being in proximity to Planet Fitness was a core part of my digital nomading strategy here. So I got to the Planet Fitness in Roswell, New Mexico, and unbeknownst to me, the governor had banned all showers in gyms. So I got there, and what was interesting to me is no one in the Planet Fitness was wearing a mask. None of the front desk staff were. I think there were a handful of people working out. No one was wearing a mask, but the shower area and the changing rooms and the bathroom were caution taped off. So the same kind of caution tape you would see at like a crime scene. They had blocked off access to the facility. So it struck me in that moment. I was like, wow, okay, these people think, and not the people working there, but the politicians and stuff in New Mexico. It's like, okay, they think, showers are going to spread COVID, but not, these people here not wearing a mask. So I ended up having to use a Love's truck stop. Pro tip, they have showers. They're like $14, $15, or at least at the time they were. So they cost a lot to take a shower, but if you're ever in a pinch, truck stops are a good place to go. So I ended up doing that, but I got out of New Mexico rather quickly. So I, proceeded westward, was heading to Arizona. And during this time too, I have some very close friends, and one of my good friends really loves the New York Times. So she was, updating me, and we were talking every day. And she was really concerned because if you remember during COVID, the New York Times would have color-coded maps, almost like a heat map of how bad COVID was in certain parts of the country. And parts of Arizona were red, deep red. So that signified, there wasn't enough hospital space to go around. It was a really dangerous area. If you got sick, you would be at extra risk. Well, one of the things you wouldn't know if you've never been to Arizona or you've never been to the Southwest in general is that it's very spread out. So yes, while an influx of sick people in a very small hospital could create problems, in reality, if you base hospital facilities based on per capita, like it really wasn't as bad as people thought it was. So there were certain hospitals where they only had like one ICU bed, for example, or like one ventilator. So if one person needed it, they were already at max capacity. And if two people needed it, it was at the end of the world. And so that like nuances and that data weren't really being captured in the New York Times coverage of the pandemic. We were just given these like maps to look at and see, okay, red equals danger. Having being at 100% capacity in a small town where there's 100 people is very different than being at 100% capacity in, say, like the Bronx, right? So there's these nuances and population demographics and data. And so at that point, I started to realize the facts on the ground, the things I was seeing with my own eyes, were very different than what was being reported in the news. And again, I had traveled all the way south, but had gone from Texas to New Mexico to Arizona and seen the change in policies. And, Texas was pretty much open during the pandemic. Yeah, everyone wore masks, but, life carried on. Whereas in upstate New York, where I'm from, things were shut down and people were really opposed to it because, where I'm from a Rust Belt town, and hairdressers and mechanics and working class people really relied on being able to run their businesses. And when the governor in Albany says you can't run your business because she's making decisions based on what's happening in New York City, the people in upstate New York really suffer. And so I started to think more critically, was thinking about how I was seeing things, and was, open to experiencing different news sources and news outlets. I don't know when I started listening to Joe Rogan, but sometime during this podcast or during this road trip, you spend a lot of time in your car. So I was listening to podcasts and just hearing different things, seeing how certain doctors were talking out and just like asking normal questions about what was happening, about what was going into the vaccines that were being created, and they were being suppressed. So I was seeing in real time how kind of the facts on the ground weren't lining up with what was being covered in the media, and then there were these alternative media sources that were sharing information that was very clearly being suppressed. So it started to get my gears turning, and I'm a naturally curious person. So I was kind of open to the idea of, okay, well, maybe there's something more here. So by, I would say like spring of 2021, I got to Oregon. So I wasn't expecting any of this when I got to Oregon. I was honestly hoping to go to Portland. I love coffee. At the time, again, I was very liberal, hipster, love coffee. I thought Portland was this great mecca for hipsters, and boy, was I proven wrong. I got to Oregon first. I think I was in Coos Bay, I want to say, but I remember going to a coffee shop, sitting down as normal, and I remember there was a sign on the table that said, if you show proof of vaccine, so if you take your vaccine card and you show it to the barista, you could sit in their cafe without a mask on. If you didn't, you would have to sit with a mask on the whole time. And again, policies differed from place to place. In Texas and in Arizona, I could sit at, Panera Bread, for example, and eat my meal without a mask. And I could sit in a booth and be fine and only wear a mask if I got up to move. Whereas other places like this, you had to sit with a mask the whole time and like kind of, take your mask down and take a drink of coffee and then replace it. But I thought the whole presenting a COVID ID in order to do something, that was an immediate red flag for me. That was like, okay, we're moving into some not so good territory. So I observed that, I witnessed that, and then I got to Portland, and I didn't even last 24 hours in Portland. It was just pretty bad. If you're from Portland and you can add some like commentary in the comments, please do. But I think this was a point in time when just drugs were out of control, homelessness was out of control, and just Portland was not a good place. So again, I relied on Planet Fitnesses. So I was going to a Planet Fitness. I just didn't know anything about Portland, just kind of Googled one later in the day. And the Planet Fitness, similar to the one in New Mexico, had boarded up their showers. You weren't allowed to use them. But what really concerned me is that when I went to scan my ID to go into the Planet Fitness, I was asked to present my COVID cards so that they could, quote, put it in their system. So Planet Fitness is a franchise, right? It's owned, all sorts of different people own Planet Fitness. I don't know who owns the ones in Portland. I don't care. The fact of the matter is, when you start asking people for personal health data, which is what this vaccine card is, it's personal health data. When you start asking for that, that's a dangerous slippery slope. And I understand, for jobs and stuff, you have to have passed certain health things. When I worked for the government, I traveled overseas a lot, so I had to have certain vaccines in place. When I lived in the Middle East, fun story, but if you get a residency card, I lived in Jordan, so if you get a residency card, they make you go to the police station and do an HIV test as part of like the condition of living there. So like I've had to do stuff like that before, where I've had to show proof of health things, vaccine things, test negative for tuberculosis, test negative for HIV, all that kind of stuff. So I'm not opposed to that. But when a private business requires access to that information in order for me to engage in commercial activities, that's when like some like red flags started going off. So I was exposed to that. Again, conveniently, there wasn't homogeneity in how policies were being implemented. I literally drove across the bridge into Vancouver, Washington, found a Planet Fitness there, had no problem at all using their facilities. So Washington had very different policies than Portland, and all that separates the two was a bridge and a river. So again, it became very clear to me over probably a 4 or 5 month period of time that almost everything was politically motivated. There wasn't continuity across different states and how the policies were being implemented. And then as the vaccine was getting rolled out and implemented, I could see how this could be potentially weaponized. And I'm not saying that in this instance it was weaponized, but I could see the slippery slope of, if you're requiring me to have this vaccine card today to access your gym, what's that look like tomorrow? Or is that going to become, our vaccine passport's going to become a thing. So it's not like I just started listening to Joe Rogan and became indoctrinated. There were things I was observing and witnessing with my own eyes that like I began asking questions about. And so I actually, much to my chagrin, I became very concerned about this, because around this time as well, a contract I had been working on came to an end. So I was in a very economically vulnerable situation. I ended up working that summer in Jackson, Wyoming. And there, that's a more liberal leaning county in Wyoming. So people were freaking out. They reinstituted a mask mandate right before I left. But right before, so in Montana and then in Wyoming, I decided to get the shot. I didn't want the vaccine, and I think I'm too much of a moral person to have even considered forging one. I didn't even know people were doing that, or you could do that. I didn't even think about it, and I wish I had. But I got the vaccine. I got at least the first 2 doses of it. And that gives me a lot of anxiety, right? Because you're seeing all the stuff that's coming out now. People with myocarditis and, people having issues, fertility issues and stuff. And so I'm hoping for the best. I'm hoping, I'm not a guinea pig in all this, but I think as time has gone on, I'm resentful of how the position this put me in, right? And I think a lot of people feel the same way. We were lied to. This was pushed through. The efficacy of it was not thoroughly tested. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but to trust the science means performing the science. And I saw what was happening on the West Coast and how vaccine mandates were being implemented. But then also when I got back to New York, I went to an event in Rochester, and you had to show proof of vaccine to attend that event as well. So I saw how the vaccine card was being implemented to potentially restrict economic activity. You saw in the news how people were losing jobs. Nurses, for example, military members who refused to get vaccinated, who lost their jobs. I was in an economically precarious position where I could not afford to be excluded from the economy. So I got the vaccine, and I'm not happy about it, but it is what it is, and you got to move forward from there. So COVID really started opening me up to what was happening. So fast forward, 2022, I go on a trip again. My intent was to move to Austin. I ended up taking a 1-year break in Asheville, North Carolina. Absolutely loved it. But again, started seeing some things. At the time, I think I was still liberal, but I started being more aware of and open to different ideas. So one of the things I started doing at this time is I started freelancing. I had not been a freelance writer before. I had been struggling up until this point to make any sort of income as a writer. And suddenly a bunch of freelance work plopped itself on my lap. And for the first time in my life, I made what felt like a lot of money. I had my first 5-figure month. I think it was in 2023. But I had my first 5-figure month because of all the freelance work I was getting. So I was not only working for myself, but I felt successful at it. And so once I started working for myself and being accountable to earning my own money, my position really changed on a lot of things, and just how I view the economy, how I view my responsibility in the economy. Things like taxes, things like health insurance, right? I took a much more, I would say, fiscally conservative position on that because I became aware of things that I hadn't been aware of before. So a great example, and you might not know this if you're a W-2 employee, is that the tax, you're taxed for Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and all that stuff. The tax that's assessed to you is actually double what comes out of your paycheck. So for most people, you probably see a 12.5% FICA tax. I think it's 12.5 FICA tax in your that comes out of your paycheck, right? But for self-employed people, we are both the employee and the employer. So I have to pay that tax twice. So instead of paying it once, it's closer to 25%. The good news is I get to deduct, stuff. So there are deductions, of course. But that's cash. Like I have to withhold, and you have to pay quarterly taxes to the IRS. So I am responsible for that. There's no W-2 paycheck withholding those taxes for me. I have to pay that. And so when you're just getting started out, you don't have really good cash flow. Like you have a choice between saving money for paying the IRS or buying groceries, right? And because you're self-employed, like you don't have access to the social safety net that a lot of other people do. Like I can't just go claim like I've lost 100% of my freelance writing work right now. That's one of the reasons why I've started doing YouTube more, because I'm trying to, find different ways to make up for that loss and kind of share my thoughts as well with the world. But I don't get access to all of the wonderful programs that I'm paying into. I can't just go get SNAP benefits at a whim. I don't get Medicaid, nor do I want to. I want to make that very clear as well. I don't want access. Like I really want to work hard and support myself and, put forth a good effort. I don't want to rely on the government to provide for me, but I'm also aware that I'm paying into programs I don't benefit from. And one of the things that colors my perspective on this is that I have some close family members who are beneficiaries of these programs. I don't blame them, okay? I want to make that very clear. I don't blame them. I understand why they access these programs. But I've seen, again, witnessing firsthand how these programs are abused, intentionally or not. I have one family member who works part-time, would love to work more, is capable of working more, could work more, right? I'm sure the employer and this family member would absolutely love to work more. They can't. The value of the benefits they receive from Medicaid is greater than whatever they would make working full time. They would lose their benefits if they work over a certain, amount each month. So they can only earn a certain amount. If they go over that, they will lose the benefits, and whatever they earn, probably gonna be like $100, $200 more in cash. That is gonna be far less than the value of those benefits. And so there's an incentive. There is, welfare is a lifestyle for a lot of people. But there's also an incentive not to work harder, not to get yourself out, because there's like this chasm, right? So there's people who are really poor and need it. There's people who maybe they're making a little bit, but they're still struggling. And then there's, people up here on the socioeconomic, ladder. So if you imagine this kind of like a graph, right? So the people here make too much to qualify for a lot of these programs, but they also don't make enough to support themselves. So if you're down here, and you see the math of the people up here in this part, like, you're not going to want to work harder. No one's going to want to work 40 hours a week to make $20,000 a year when they can just subsist on food stamps and be poor and make, about the same amount. So for folks kind of at the lower ends of the socioeconomic totem pole, and definitely like the lower middle class, there's a strong incentive not to work. And so freelancing and working for myself, being accountable, being responsible for my own income, and then paying taxes, seeing how much actually goes to Uncle Sam every month, really started making me more fiscally conservative. Because I think people should, if you're successful, you should be able to keep your success. Like, you should be able to keep the fruits of your labor. And everyone's like, well, we should tax the billionaires, right? Okay. Well, it doesn't stop at the billionaires, right? You tax the billionaires first, and eventually they go away. Then you tax the millionaires, and then they go away. And then you tax people with 6-figure incomes, and they go away, and eventually it comes down to you. So you have to be, and that's something I've always approached life with, is you have to understand that whatever you do can come back to you. It's a boomerang effect. And so I'm acutely aware of that. So I think that was something that really kind of woke me up and started making me realize, okay, maybe the Democratic Party isn't the party for me. And then kind of two other things happened in that period of time that are worth noting. One, I got off Instagram. I think it was probably the summer of 2022. I quit cold turkey. I saw how it was negatively affecting my life. It got me into the woman's sphere and made me believe things that weren't real. So I got off Instagram. I have not used Instagram since then. And I think all women should get off Instagram. It's just absolutely garbage. And I think it's doing a lot more harm than good. But more importantly, during this time, I was in my early 30s. So, I still am in my early 30s, but I was turned, 31 when I moved to Asheville. And so I can't tell you how or why. I just remember one day I was out for a run, and I just, was thinking running is a really good way for me to like process all my thoughts. So I was out for a run, and it just finally dawned on me, like, I want a family. All this feminism garbage had told me I shouldn't want a family. Families are going to ruin my career. Well, I didn't have a career anymore, right? Career was out of the way. Didn't have that. Well, I started, seeing things when I was traveling. I was on the move all the time, and I realized, it was fun for that period of time. I didn't want to be a nomad for the rest of my life. Like, I want to settle down, have a house, have a husband, have a family, have kids. And I think it dawned on me in that period of time that, oh my gosh, I've basically run down my biological clock. And I think this is the case for a lot of people. Like, people tend to move more conservative in their 30s, and I think this is part of it. You have guys who settle down, get married, have kids, and they decide, okay, I want to be a good father. I want to be the best father I can be. And then women are like, okay, I'm ready. I want to be a mother. And so I think there's an innate biological clock inside of everyone. And so for me, that kind of biological clock switched on, and I realized, like, feminism was getting in the way. I wasn't seeing the returns on investment I had been promised. I didn't get the career I wanted. I was struggling to earn an income. I was earning my own income, but I was struggling. And the patriarchy wasn't to blame. There were, other issues with that as well. Everyone was saying that I had lost all these rights. I couldn't think of a single right I had lost. I don't think of abortion as a right. It's, as I've gotten older, like, I've started to think, wow, this is kind of insidious. Like, why are we committing infanticide and celebrating it? And so I started again being more open to the idea of, maybe there's an alternative pathway for my life that I hadn't seen for myself. And maybe I should consider it more. Maybe I should be more open to it. And of course, along all this period of time, by the way, and this whole little like roadmap I've created here, people came along, shared ideas with me, and so it wasn't like anything, all this happened in a vacuum, right? Like I was being exposed to different thoughts and ideas and becoming more open and aware of them. So 2023, I moved to Texas, and, my mission was to find a husband and get married and start a family, because that became priority number one for me. And so I moved to Texas, and one of the things I did when I moved to Texas is I was part of a walking group for a short period of time. And the walking group was really cool because you could like ask whatever questions you wanted to. And so I would pose questions, and sometimes controversial ones. But I had started becoming more aware of dating culture in a way I really hadn't before. Because when I was in Asheville, like dating life was non-existent. That's one of the reasons, why I left, is because like I was on a mission and I could not fulfill my mission in Asheville. So I was like, okay, this isn't the place for me. Texas had been calling me for a while, and I just really felt compelled to move to Texas. So I did. And so I started, engaging with dating culture, and a lot of the stuff I've talked about in some of my other videos, and a lot of stuff you're aware of in culture with guys opting out, guys not wanting to participate. I was just so oblivious to all of that. I, for the longest time, had thought I wasn't being approached in public, or people weren't, asking me out or things like that, because there was something fundamentally wrong with me. And that's, where the church upbringing comes in as well. As I had been taught all these things to believe about myself that weren't necessarily true, but I had really internalized them. And so when I saw things reflected back to me in public sphere, I just was like, oh my gosh, like something's wrong with me. But I started using the walking group just to like ask questions that I was curious about, and things that, I didn't get to engage with in the women's sphere up until this point, as everything I've shared here. I was doing women's things, and one of the freelancing jobs I was working was with a feminist publication in New York City, and I was isolated during COVID and kind of on my own, so I wanted to get a different perspective. So I forget what the question was I asked one day, but I was asking about Me Too, and the stories I heard about that, I had not up until that point in time put two and two together, that Me Too had done irreparable harm to the relationship between men and women. It had not dawned on me that guys were scared, not even just guys scared to date, but like even employers scared to hire women because of this culture we had created of false allegations and, trying men in the court of public opinion. And you just saw this with the tea app scandal, right? Like all these guys were doxxed and tea was spilled about them. And it wasn't even like pertaining to safety. It was about, oh, this guy smells bad, or, this guy didn't pay on the first date or whatever. It was just like really superficial stuff. And so I started becoming aware of how guys were feeling in a way that I hadn't been exposed to before. So I just started questioning feminism, challenging it for myself. By this point in time too, the trans movement had become more of a focal point, right? It had been going on for a while. I had heard about, the Leah Thomas scandal at Penn State or University of Pennsylvania, Dylan Mulvaney, obviously the scandal with Bud Light and stuff like that. So I'd been aware of these things and critical of them. And eventually it got to a point in like 2022, 2023, where I was fed up. I was like, okay, I can't be a biological woman if Dylan Mulvaney is considered equal to me. That's a red line. Like I can't cross that. I'm not willing to cross that. If you want to be a trans, whatever, that's your prerogative. But if you're a trans man, you are not a man. You are a trans man. Likewise, if you're a trans woman, you are not a woman. And this push for equality with women and how like people like J.K. Rowling were treated in the media and on social media, it really struck me like, wow, there's an ideological line here that I'm not willing to cross and I'm not willing to surrender to. So I had COVID in the back of my mind. I saw how I'd capitulated and bent the knee when it came to the vaccine. So I wasn't willing to do that with the trans movement. And so like things about gender and gender relationships and trans and all that stuff, it really started to culminate for me. And when I got to Texas and just started to become more aware of things. But at this point too, I was also just trying to feel really burnt out, trying to write, and I was trying to do consulting work at the time too. And just things weren't working out the way I had hoped. And, one of the things I didn't mention here, but, in 2022, ChatGPT came online, right? And I think that we're going to look at that in the history books the same way we look at the Gutenberg press today, but that fundamentally has changed society. So I knew once ChatGPT came online that whatever promise that feminists had made for career was out the window. Like there was no way like feminists were going to be able to make good on the promises that they have been, proclaiming for decades now about this, equality and utopia and all. Like it's all out the window. So I just started getting burnt out, getting more curious about things. I didn't write this either, but I was undergoing a lot of self-study. So really, studying economics, just reading actual books and learning things. Like I have, Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. I've been, every here and there I'll read through and, just going back to the primary source and reading it and contextualizing it with, working for myself and trying to earn my own money and how the government operates. And having worked in the government, I have, an understanding, looking now with Doge and how that played out. It's like, okay, I understand why we're getting rid of all these government agencies. They're totally useless. So I think for me, there was a lot of context and I could reference back to things. And eventually that got me to a point where in 2024, I voted for Trump because, and it wasn't, and I want to make this very clear because I think people confuse everyone who voted for Trump as a MAGA supporter or like they're ideologically aligned with like a far right ideology. And that's absolutely not true. My vote for Trump wasn't necessarily a vote for Trump. It was a vote against the Democratic Party. I cannot support a party that is feminist, that supports DEI, that tells me white people are evil, that tells me women are and men are equal in the sense that a man can become a woman and is treated preferentially with everything that women have. I can't accept that. And it's not about the bathrooms. People talk about, gender equality and access to bathrooms and how trans guys are going to come into bathrooms. It's not that for me. I'm a much more deeper thinker. And so for me, I've recognized if you surrender biology, you're surrendering your humanness because again, with ChatGPT in mind, we're moving into an AI dominated world, an entirely new technologically driven world where the things that make us human no longer are relevant, our cognitive capabilities, our superiority in terms of thinking and reasoning, that's all about to go out the window, right? And so one of the philosophies that has been making inroads in Silicon Valley, where all these technologies are being created, is transhumanism. And that's the idea where humans are going to be able to liberate themselves from the confines of their biology. So we're not that far off from seeing an entirely new species of humans being created. So you and I could be the last Homo sapiens. And just like think about that. That is incredibly profound. And the new species that emerges, whatever that is, it's going to have inorganic components to it. So that might be biologic or, bionic arms or, replaceable limbs or something. That could be internally. So, someone who has some sort of implant that makes them perform better, gives them better lung performance. I don't know. Designer babies. We're already seeing this where you can select for certain genes and certain types. Neuralink, once you get that implanted, you're going to have people with superhuman cognitive intelligence. They're able to, interface with AI in a way that we can't currently interface. And so you're going to see an entirely new species of human emerge. And it's going to leapfrog far above the rest of us. You're seeing space exploration. So there's obviously this push to colonize Mars. So you're seeing a departure in real time from life as we know it. And for me, I've drawn a line in the sand. Earth is my home and I am a human. And I want to raise a family and have a family and they will be humans as well. And so with the policies that the Democratic Party is pushing, it makes it very difficult for me to defend my identity, my purpose, my being. I can't be an American citizen in a country where anyone can walk across the border and also have the same rights that I have. I can't be a woman. Like I said, if folks like Dylan Mulvaney can also claim womanhood, and so I'm seeing this degradation of kind of where we're at, and things like citizenship and biology and, you know, our rights. I'm seeing that, the censorship during COVID, like I'm just seeing all of that stuff happening in real time. And unlike a lot of people, I see where that's going, and I think deeply about these things. And I understand that we need, you know, parameters around this and guardrails, and those aren't being created. So I'm not saying that you know, Trump here is a savior of mankind, right? Like, I'm not all in on MAGA because I fundamentally believe in it. It's because I think that is the least bad option right now. I think the way the Democratic Party is going, especially as it moves towards socialism, I think that, you know, socialism, transhumanism, globalism, you know, it's taking away the things that I value, and that are important to me. So it's acting in contradiction to my values. So I can't possibly be a Democrat moving forward. So the option at the moment is being more conservative, but it's not that I believe in a conservative ideology. It's that I believe in a more traditional way of life, going back to, you know, I look at the 1950s as an example, but I've seen how feminism has failed. I've seen how, you know, kind of capitalism has gone off the guardrails. I'm not saying capitalism is bad, but everything can be bad if it's not in the right dose, right? Water can poison you if you drink too much of it, and it can hurt you. So even good things in excess can be bad. So I'm seeing all of this. I've been more critical and more open to it. And so that's kind of the long and short of how I went from being a Hillary voter to now being a you know, Trump voter. And we'll see where I go from here. It won't be Democrat, I'll tell you that much. Like, there's no way. So long as men can be women and, you know, we're going to Mars, like I'm not hopping on that train. So my recommendation, if you're a guy watching this and you're like, okay, well, I have this feminist girl or liberal girl and she's in my life and I don't know where to go. You know, women need to be led. I know women don't like being told that. I think we like to think of ourselves as strong, independent girl bosses, but at the end of the day, women need to be led. Being a leader is hard. If women could actually lead, you would see self-discipline and accountability in their lives, and the vast majority of them aren't accountable and they're not self-disciplined. And feminism, I think, is a perfect example of this. They would rather blame a made-up patriarchy and blame someone else for their own problems than take accountability and take action and rectify whatever situation they're going through for themselves. So they need leadership. But at the same time, I don't think modern women want to be told what to do. So the challenge for guys is leading women in such a way that they can come to the conclusions on their own, or at least give them the belief that they're coming to the conclusions on their own, and let them take ownership of the conclusions they come to. And so for me, that, like I said here, for me, it was traveling, right? It was leaving my context and what I was used to and seeing different parts of the country, seeing different things with my own eyes. Had I stayed in DC and experienced the pandemic in DC, I would still probably be very liberal. Like, my life would be very different. But the fact that I got out, I experienced the country, I did things, I think helped me see, wow, the media isn't actually saying the right thing about this, right? Like, I have context. You know, a great example is over, you know, crime. People are talking about crime in cities. Crime is made up. But over time, you've seen an increase in things being locked up behind plexiglass. You're seeing stores leave cities. San Francisco, for example, like stores that, you know, Target has left places. You're seeing things close up shops. So you're seeing an increase in crime. You're seeing an increase in the presence of illegal migrants in a lot of these cities. You're seeing a rise in theft and retail theft. You're seeing closures. You're seeing a new way of life that didn't exist before. Like, a decade ago, if you lived in New York City, or even in DC for that matter, I didn't have to go ask someone to unlock a plexiglass to get a pint of Ben & Jerry's, right? But now that's been normalized. And so for me, like, by traveling, I got to experience different levels of that in different places, and I could correlate oh, this isn't a safe area. There's, there were all sorts of times I would travel to places and I knew how safe a place was based on if they had those mobile blue light police, like robot scanner things in the parking lot. If the Walmart had a gate to enter, not all Walmarts have gates to enter, and how much stuff was behind plexiglass. Like I could tell the safety of an area based on that. And so had I not traveled, had I not had that experience, I don't think I would have had the context to understand how much life has deteriorated for people in cities over time. So my best advice is, if you're a dude, you need to lead. You need to step up and be a leader for the women in your lives. You don't need to demand them to do things. You don't need to, enforce them in like a top-down way. But kind of in the same way, honestly, that you would try to teach a child and show a child something and help them understand that what you're telling them is for their best interest. Like, you kind of have to approach women that way, and help them come to the conclusions for themselves. And for me, at least, travel helped in seeing different areas. So if you live in a city, maybe go to rural America and realize, hey, like, all these people aren't, these MAGA people aren't as bad as they're being made out to be in the media. I think that could do a lot of good. And you can travel domestically. Like, this is a great country. There's lots to see here. But I think removing yourself from whatever context you're currently in and putting yourself in a new context that challenges your assumptions, I think will help you do that. If you have access to some sort of community group or a group that doesn't confirm what you already believe, that could also be an option. So if you're open to going to church on a Sunday and participating in that, that could be an opportunity as well. Not saying that's the only way, but now that I'm older and looking back, I've come to the conclusion that the feminists were wrong and the church ladies were right. So I think there is value in church life. So yeah, I think that's kind of long and short of how I came about it. And again, it's not like I just listened to a bunch of podcasts or like read a bunch of books and like came to this conclusion. It was, I had the right context and I had the openness to hear different things at the right time and context to compare things across space and time. So I had reference points where I could see how things were changing, where they were going. And then I could see the hypocrisy and the paradoxes within policies that I don't think I would have been able to see had I been in an echo chamber that only fed me the narrative that Trump is a fascist, he's taking all of our rights, women are being suppressed, we're going into a Handmaid's Tale kind of world. So I think you need to get out of whatever you're in, experience something different, and slowly be open to hearing different perspectives. Seeing, like, if you're opposed to the Second Amendment, go to a range. Like, I got to go to a range, and it was really fun. And I got to experience things, and believe it or not, people who own guns, they're not as crazy as you think. They're very safe with them. Like, safety is the number one priority for these people. And I've seen firsthand how much of a hassle it is to get a gun, get a suppressor, get these things. And it's wild to me where we have, the media spins it one way, and then the people who are law-abiding citizens, who are safe, who are doing the best practices, right? They're being punished for it. So just get out of your comfort zone, do something different, change your context, be open to different ideas. And if you're a guy, you have to step up and be a leader, because women aren't going to be a leader. And I say this as a very disciplined person who has had a lot of success leading myself. Even I need led, right? And most women aren't like me. So that's what I would recommend. And I'd be curious if there's anyone watching this who has also had a similar evolution out of liberalness, and now you find yourself kind of center, conservative, politically homeless, however you want to define yourself. I would be curious to know more about what your experience was like, if you can resonate with any of this, or if your experience was different. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. And with that, I will see you in the next video.